A struggling single dad helps a woman juggle a pile of books outside a library, unaware she's the hidden force behind one of the world's most powerful companies, and about to rewrite both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The alarm clock buzzed at 5:32 a.m., a dull, persistent sound that clawed at the edges of Jason Cole's sleep. He groaned softly and rubbed the back of his neck before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The old radiator hissed in protest as it worked to warm the house, and Jason pulled a sweatshirt over his head, the faded fabric worn thin from too many early mornings just like this one. Down the hall, the door to Nora's room stood slightly ajar. He peeked and she was still curled beneath the blankets, a tangle of dark curls and stuffed animals. For a moment he just watched her breathe, a quiet rhythm that reminded him why he kept going. The kitchen light flickered once before, fully coming to life, casting a pale glow over the chipped countertops and mismatched mugs. Jason moved through the motions. Coffee grounds scooped, lunch packed. A sticky note stuck to Nora's thermos with a doodled smiley face. A small ritual, but one that mattered. He couldn't always give her everything, but he could give her these little pieces of normal. By the time the sun began to smear faint gold across the horizon, he was already dressed in khakis and a slightly wrinkled button-down, his tie looped loosely around his neck. Part-time teaching paid just enough to cover the essentials most of the time. The rest he patched together with tutoring, weekend shifts at the hardware store, and a silent prayer that nothing major broke in the house. "Dad?" came a sleepy voice from the hallway. He turned to find Nora standing there in her polka-dot pajamas, eyes puffy and hair wild. "Hey, Munchkin," he said gently. "You're up early." She nodded and shuffled over to lean against him. "Had a weird dream. You were flying a spaceship and forgot how to land." Jason smiled, crouching to her level. "Good thing you woke up. I probably needed the help." They stood there for a beat, the world outside still quiet. No emails, no deadlines, no bills for a moment, just the two of them in their tiny kitchen, wrapped in warmth that didn't come from the radiator. "Let's make today a good one," he whispered, and she nodded, her small hand gripping his. They had no choice but to keep going. But they were in it together. The wind had picked up that afternoon, tugging at coat sleeves and whipping stray leaves across the pavement. Jason parked his old sedan along Main Street, the brakes groaning like they were tired of the same routine. He glanced at the clock, just enough time to pick up a few books before picking Nora up from choir practice. She'd started reading anything with magic and maps, and he'd promised her they'd find the next book in the series. The library sat like a quiet heartbeat in the center of town. Its brick walls were weathered but steady, and the large wooden doors creaked with the kind of charm only small towns seem to preserve. As Jason stepped out of the car, he spotted someone struggling near the front steps. A woman, bundled in a wool coat, was awkwardly balancing a towering stack of hardcover books in her arms. The wind caught the top few, wobbling them dangerously as she tried to shift her grip without dropping the rest. Jason didn't even think he was already moving. "Hey, let me give you a hand." The woman looked up, startled. For a moment, her eyes met his sharp but kind, a gray-green color that didn't match the rest of her understated appearance. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, and strands were slipping into her face. "Oh, thank you," she said, breathless. He took half the stack from her arms, with practiced ease. "Bit ambitious, huh?" She chuckled, brushing the hair from her face. "I wasn't planning to take this many, but I got carried away." They climbed the steps together, the books awkward between them but the moment oddly comfortable. "You new in town?" he asked casually. "Just visiting," she said. "Needed a change of scenery." Jason nodded. "Well, the library's probably the coziest place in all of Harper Ridge, aside from the diner. But the books here don't judge you for how much pie you eat." That made her smile genuine, if a little tired. "Sounds perfect." Inside, they dropped the books at the front desk. "I'm Jason," he offered. She hesitated, then replied, "Rachel?" He watched her walk toward the reading room, a strange tug in his chest. "Just visiting," she'd said. but something about her didn't feel temporary. Jason lingered in the nonfiction aisle longer than he needed to. He wasn't looking for anything in particular anymore. His mind was still back at the front steps, stuck on the woman in the wool coat with the delicate smile and an armful of borrowed stories. He told himself it was curiosity. Politeness, maybe. But when he spotted her again, seated in the quiet corner of the reading room with a paperback in her lap and a steaming cup of library coffee on the table beside her, something unspoken pulled him forward. She looked up before he could speak, as if sensing someone near. Her eyes softened when they landed on him. "Jason, right?" she said, tucking a bookmark neatly between the pages. He nodded, suddenly aware of the creases in his shirt and the faint scent of car oil that still clung to his jacket. "Hope I didn't scare you off with the pie joke." "On the contrary," she said with a small smile. "I've now added the diner to my list." Her voice was calm and unhurried, the kind that settled in your chest before you even realized it. Jason gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," she said, moving her coffee aside. "I'm Rachel, by the way. Thanks again for earlier. I probably would have ended up chasing books down Main Street." "Glad I could help," he said, sitting down. "You visiting family?" She paused, just a second too long. "No, just taking a break from the city. Needed some quiet." Jason nodded. He didn't push. Her words were measured, her smile easy but layered like someone who'd practiced being fine even when they weren't. They talked for a while. The kind of low-stakes conversation that warmed the space between strangers' books they loved as kids, the best pie flavors, how winter always came too fast. She laughed at one of his offhand comments, a real laugh, and it caught him off guard. Rachel was hard to read, but not because she was cold. If anything, there was something carefully tucked away beneath her calm surface, something sharp and weary, like she'd learned to be soft the hard way. And Jason found himself wanting to know why. The wind had picked up again by the time they stepped outside, kicking leaves down the sidewalk like nature's confetti. Jason tucked his hands into his coat pockets, and Rachel held her scarf a little tighter around her neck. For a moment, they stood at the top of the library steps, like they weren't sure what came next. "You hungry?" Jason asked, his tone light but hopeful. "There's a little cafe around the corner. They make a decent cappuccino and an even better excuse to avoid whatever you were supposed to do this afternoon." Rachel hesitated for a breath, then smiled. "You had me at cappuccino." The cafe was small, tucked between the hardware store and a florist's shop, with foggy windows and the soft hum of acoustic music playing inside. A bell chimed as they entered. Jason picked a table by the window while Rachel ordered their drink. She noticed she paid in cash. They sat across from each other, the aroma of coffee and cinnamon filling the space between them. "So," Jason said, cupping his mug, "what's a city girl like you doing in a town with more tractors than stoplights?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, amused. "You think I'm from the city?" "Your coat says yes. So does the way you talk about quiet like it's a foreign country." She chuckled, stirring her drink. "Fair enough. I guess I just needed a change of pace, a little distance, somewhere to breathe." Jason nodded slowly. "I get that. Small towns aren't glamorous, but they grow on you. People remember your name, your order, your dog's birthday. It's comforting, in a weird way. Or suffocating," she added, but there was no malice in her tone. "Depends on what you're running from." Jason smiled, caught off guard by the honesty. "Touché." They moved to safer ground books they loved as kids, authors they'd reread over and over. Jason shared a few stories about Nora, how she insisted bedtime stories have dragons, how she refused to eat broccoli unless it was part of a magic potion. Rachel listened with real interest, her laughter warm and unforced. "She sounds amazing." "She is," Jason said, pride softening his features. "Keeps me grounded and tired." Rachel looked at him then, not with pity, but something gentler, like she saw the effort behind the smile, like maybe she understood. And for the first time in a long while, Jason didn't feel like he was doing all the talking. The door to the penthouse opened with a quiet click, revealing polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a panoramic view of the city skyline stretched across the night. The room was silent, elegant, immaculate, and cold, in the way expensive spaces often are when no one really lives in them. Rachel dropped her scarf on the entry table, kicked off her boots, and exhaled the kind of breath that sounded like a release and maybe a surrender. But by the time she walked past the mirror in the hallway, she had already started to change. Her name wasn't Rachel. Not really. In the reflection, she stared at herself. Dark hair tousled, her wool coat still smelling faintly of coffee and wind. She reached up, unbuttoning it slowly, like peeling back layers she had almost forgotten how to wear. Beneath the casual outfit was the posture of someone raised to command rooms and deflect scrutiny. In the stillness of the suite, Evelyn Blake emerged again. She crossed the living room and poured a glass of sparkling water from the fridge, bypassing the wine. Her assistant had left a stack of documents on the marble countertop: projections, acquisition reports, board meeting notes. She glanced at them briefly but didn't sit down. Her mind wasn't here. It was still in that cafe, still with him, Jason, the kind-eyed teacher who smelled faintly of engine grease and cinnamon, who had talked about bedtime stories and broccoli like they were sacred, who had looked at her like she was a personate, a headline, not a CEO, not a dollar sign. Evelyn walked to the window, glass in hand, and stared out at the glittering city. She had built an empire on controlling, knowing what people wanted before they even said it. She'd been called brilliant, ruthless, visionary. But today, she'd been Rachel, just Rachel, and no one had looked at her like she was dangerous. Her phone buzzed: messages from her assistant, from the CFO, from the PR team. She silenced it. Tonight, she didn't want to be Evelyn Blake, CEO of Blake Hart Enterprises. She just wanted to remember what it felt like to be unknown. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that settles in just after dishes are done and backpacks are zipped for tomorrow. The hallway light cast a soft glow through the crack beneath Nora's bedroom door, and Jason pushed it open gently, careful not to startle her. She was already under the covers, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked beside her, and a paperback splayed across her chest. Her eyes were half-lidded, that dreamy place between awake and asleep where everything feels safe. "Did you finish your chapter?" he asked softly, lowering himself to sit on the edge of her bed. "Almost," she murmured, pushing the book aside. "But I want a story from you tonight, one of the made-up ones." Jason smiled, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "All right, let's see." He paused, letting the moment breathe, then began with the familiar rhythm she loved. "Once upon a time," he said, "in a little town that didn't look like much from far away, there lived a girl who could talk to clouds." Nora's eyes brightened just a little. "Real clouds?" "Very real," Jason whispered. "Fluffy ones, stormy ones, even the cranky ones shaped like dragons, but only she could hear them." "What did they say?" Nora asked, her voice muffled by her pillow. "They told her secrets," Jason said, "like where to find lost socks, or how to make a wish that really works. But they also told her that she was brave even on days she didn't feel it." Nora blinked slowly, her breathing beginning to settle. "Was she alone?" Jason shook his head, his voice softening. "Nope, she had her dad. He didn't have magic, but he was really good at pancakes and fixing leaky faucets. And whenever she forgot how special she was, he reminded her. He looked down at her then." Her small fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, her rabbit tucked tight to her side. "You're the best dad," she mumbled, already drifting. Jason leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Sleep tight, bug." As he stood and turned off the lamp, he paused in the doorway, watching her for a long moment. In a world that rarely gave him a break, she was his whole reason, his fairy tale, his everything. The boardroom was all glass and chrome sleek, cold, efficient, the kind of room designed to remind people just how much money moved through it. A panoramic view of the skyline stretched behind the long conference table, but no one was looking at the view. All eyes were on Evelyn Blake as she stepped through the door. She was no longer in boots and a wool coat. Today, she wore a tailored navy suit, heels that clicked like punctuation across the marble floor, and a calm expression crafted over years of practice. Her hair was pulled into a tight chignon. Every inch of her said control. "Morning?" she said evenly, taking her place at the head of the table. Her assistant set a slim laptop in front of her, along with a neatly organized folder of talking points and financial briefs. The room quieted. Across from her sat Russell Hanley, the CFO, already flipping through a printout with red markup. Beside him, two board members whispered until Evelyn's gaze landed on them sharp, unreadable. They stopped. "We'll begin with Q4 projections," she said, without needing to look at the agenda. "Then discuss the proposal for restructuring the community outreach branches." Restructuring, a neat word for cutting. As the CFO launched into numbers margins, forecasts, markets shifting, Evelyn listened, but part of her was somewhere else. Not distracted, not detached, just distant, like a woman watching herself from behind glass. She could hear Jason's voice, low and warm, asking her if she was from around here. The way he looked at her like she was just a person, not a brand or a name stamped on stock tickers. The way Nora had beamed when Rachel, not Evelyn, had promised to come to her school play. "As for the rural learning centers," Russell was saying, "we project a 6% cut in overhead if we shut down the remaining 4 by spring." Evelyn looked up. "They serve less than 3% of our customer base," he added, like it was nothing more than a number on a page. Her face didn't move. Her voice didn't tremble. "Let's not make any decisions until I've reviewed the reports in full." Around the room, pens paused. She offered a smooth, practiced smile, polished, in control. No one here would ever guess she'd spent the afternoon before sipping coffee in a sleepy town, listening to a man tell bedtime stories about talking clouds, and that was exactly the way she needed it. The next day, Evelyn stood in front of the library again, her coat buttoned up against the early chill, a knit hat pulled low over her ears. It was quieter than before, no wind, no traffic, just the muted hum of a town moving at its own unhurried pace. She hesitated on the steps, a rare moment of indecision for someone who made billion-dollar choices before breakfast. But this wasn't a boardroom, and she wasn't here as Evelyn Blake. Inside, the library smelled like old paper and wood polish, and she felt her shoulders relax just a little as the door closed behind her. It was a different world in here, warm, steady, unpretentious. No eyes watching her, no expectations. Just books and silence. She spotted him near the back, shelving returns with one hand and balancing a coffee mug in the other. Jason didn't see her right away. He was talking to a teenager in a school hoodie, pointing out the fantasy section with a smile that didn't look forced. Evelyn made her way toward the nearest shelf, pretending to browse. But her eyes kept drifting back to him. There was something about the way he moved, steady, unhurried, like someone who didn't need to fill every silence with noise. A kind of confidence that had nothing to do with power. When he finally noticed her, his face lit up. "Rachel?" he said, surprised, but pleased. "Back for more books already?" She nodded, smiling. "I couldn't stay away." He handed off the last of the books to a volunteer and walked toward her. "Careful. You keep showing up, and people are going to start thinking you live here." "Maybe I should," she said softly, only half joking. They wandered together into the stacks without a plan, surrounded by spines in every color. No one here asked who she was or what she owned. No one cared what kind of car she drove or how many floors her office had. With Jason, she was just Rachel. And that felt like the closest thing to real she'd been in a long, long time. And so she stayed. Not because she had toe boot, because here, she didn't have to be anyone else. It was Saturday morning, and the library had taken on a new kind of energy, louder, brighter, filled with the cheerful chaos that only a room full of kids could bring. Colorful posters hung on the walls, beanbags were scattered like oversized candy drops across the carpet, and a rolling cart full of picture books sat waiting near the front. Rachel stood near the entrance of the reading room, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, watching it all unfold like she'd stepped into a world she wasn't quite sure she belonged in. Jason spotted her almost immediately. He was kneeling beside a little boy trying to pick between Dragon's Love tacos and good night, construction site, his warm laugh cutting through the noise. "Hey, you made it," he said as he stood and walked over. Rachel nodded, offering a tentative smile. "Wouldn't miss it. I was hoping you'd say that," he said, picking up a copy of Where the Wild Things Are and holding it out to her. "Want to read one?" Her smile faltered just slightly. "Me? Oh, I don't know. I'm not exactly great with crowds, especially the small, unpredictable kind." Jason grinned. "They're a tough audience, but they forgive fast, especially if you do the monster voices." She laughed nervously. "Monster voices. Got it. You'll be fine," he said, gently nudging the book into her hands. "Besides, it's not about being perfect. It's just about showing up." That phrase stuck with her. She hadn't realized until now how long it had been since she'd done something simply for the joy of it. No agenda, no press release. Just a room full of squirming kids waiting to be entertained. A few minutes later, she sat in the storytime chair, eyes wide as she held the book open, trying to find her rhythm. The first few sentences came quietly, a little too careful, but then a little girl in a sparkly headband laughed out loud, and something in Rachel unlocked. She leaned into the words, added a snarl for the wild things, a growl for their king. She glanced up once to see Jason watching her from the back of the room, his arms folded, and a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about board meetings or press statements. She was just Rachel reading a book to a bunch of wide-eyed kids, and that, surprisingly, was enough. The story time ended in a flurry of clapping and crayon drawings. Parents mingled near the checkout desk, kids darted between shelves, and in the middle of it all, Rachel found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor, a glittery sticker now inexplicably stuck to the knee of her jeans. Nora plopped down beside her with a thud, a bright construction paper crown sliding sideways on her head. "You did the monster voices so good," she said, grinning up at Rachel. "Thanks," Rachel said, still catching her breath. "I was kind of nervous." "You didn't sound nervous," Nora replied seriously. "You sounded like a real wild thing." Jason strolled over then, 2 cups of hot cocoa in hand for Rachel and 1 for Nora, marshmallows already beginning to melt into the foam. "You passed the toughest test in town," he said, handing Rachel her cup. Official Nora approval. Rachel glanced between the two of them, heart swelling in a way she didn't quite recognize. "That's the highest honor, right?" Nora nodded. "Very exclusive. We don't let just anyone read the monster book." Jason chuckled. "I had to do a dramatic reading of the Pout Pout Fish before I earned mine." Rachel laughed, her tension easing in waves. The sound surprised Harriet wasn't polite or reserved. It was the kind that came from somewhere deep, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in years. They found a quiet spot by the big window, the sun warming the carpet as they sat on the floor and sipped cocoa. Nora chattered on about her favorite books, asking Rachel what she liked to read growing up. Rachel mentioned fantasy novels and mysteries, and Nora's eyes lit up. "You'd love the Magnolia Moon series." "I can show you. They have dragons and time travel and a really smart girl who fixes everything." "Sounds perfect," Rachel said, already feeling like the new kid desperate to fit in and strangely okay with it. When Jason excused himself to help an elderly patron, Nora leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was telling a secret. "I'm glad you came back." Rachel looked down at her. "Me too." In that moment, surrounded by cocoa-stained napkins, paperback books, and a little girl's unfiltered honesty, Rachel felt something unfamiliar but unmistakable. Belonging. The library had quieted again by late afternoon, long after the last of the glitter had been swept from the carpet and the kids had been whisked away by tired parents. The light had softened, turning golden through the tall windows as dust danced lazily in the beams. Jason and Rachel sat on the back steps, their cocoa cups empty, the last of the warmth clinging to the air like a secret. Nora was inside helping reshelve books with a volunteer badge proudly pinned to her hoodie. She'd insisted she was ready for big kid duties. Jason glanced over at Rachelno Evelyn, though she still hadn't said it, and noticed the way her shoulders relaxed when she wasn't being watched. Her hair had come loose from its careful knot, falling softly around her face, and she was rubbing her thumb over the lip of the empty cup like she was trying to smooth away a thought. "Did you always like books this much?" he asked, smiling. She paused before answering. "I think books were the only thing I could count on when I was a kid. They never asked anything from me." Jason nodded, not pushing. He'd learned to recognize when someone wanted to talk, but didn't know how to start. "I went to boarding school," she added after a moment. "Switzerland. Then New York. The kind of places where your uniform cost more than some people's rent. My parents were busy." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I saw more nannies than birthdays." Jason stayed quiet, giving her the space. "I was good at following rules," she said. "Perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect answers. People liked me when I was polished, so I just stayed polished." He studied her, but gently. "And now?" She looked at him then, something fragile in her expression. "Now I'm just trying to remember who I am when no one's watching." There was a long pause, and Jason finally said, "Well, the girl who did monster voices for 20 kids today? I think she's pretty great." A smile crept across her face, Esmel. Real. And for once Evelyn didn't feel like she had to say anything back. She just let herself sit there, warm beside someone who didn't need her resume to see her worth. The sound of heels on polished tile echoed down the corridor like a ticking clock, measured, precise, and slightly too fast. Evelyn walked into the executive floor conference room at Blake Hart with a practiced calm, her face composed, her charcoal suit impeccable. But inside, a knot had already begun to twist in her stomach. The Monday morning meeting was already in motion. Spreadsheets lined the sleek black table, color-coded and stapled. Her assistant handed her a thick report with red tabs flags for urgency. She didn't need to open it. She already knew what it said. Russell Hanley, CFO and corporate opportunist, stood at the screen clicking through slides. His voice was smooth, but it always was when something unpleasant was about to be dressed up in numbers and logic. As projected, Kone's softness continues across international markets, he said. We need a minimum 12% reduction in operational overhead to maintain shareholder guidance. He turned to Evelyn. That means eliminating underperforming initiatives, starting with regional literacy and outreach. Evelyn glanced at the list. 4 programs, all located in small towns and underserved communities. One of them was in Harper Ridge. She recognized the name immediately. Those programs barely reach 1% of our demographic, Russell continued, like he was ordering a sandwich. And we're bleeding money keeping them alive. A board member across the table nodded. They're legacy projects. Sentimental, not strategic. Evelyn said nothing, though her fingers tightened slightly around the report. We'd save $4.3 million annually by closing them before end of fiscal, Russell added. We can reallocate the resources to digital growth. I've outlined a phased plangental. Quiet, clean. Clean, like none of it would touch real people, like no one would feel it ripple through classrooms, small libraries, or after-school reading corners where the lights stayed on because Blake, Hart, paid for them. She cleared her throat. I'd like to review each program's community impact before we make that call. Russell raised an eyebrow. Of course, but we'll need a decision by the end of the quarter. Evelyn nodded. She kept her voice steady. I'll make it. But as the meeting moved on, she barely heard it. All she could think about was a girl named Nora, proudly wearing a volunteer badge, and Jason reading books like they were lifelines. Numbers were easy to cut. Faces were not. It was the kind of late autumn evening that made the world feel softer, cool air, dim porch lights, and the smell of something warm drifting out an open kitchen window. Rachel stood just outside Jason's front door, nervously adjusting the sleeves of her sweater. The house was small but cozy, its porch cluttered with potted plants and a worn welcome mat that read, "Wipe your paws." Jason opened the door with his usual easy grin. "Right on time. You hungry?" "I could eat," she said, stepping inside, instantly wrapped in the scent of garlic, something roasted, and a faint trace of motor oil, probably his jacket on the coat rack. Nora popped her head out from the hallway. "We're having spaghetti," she announced. "And garlic bread. Dad burns it sometimes, but it's still good." Rachel laughed. "Thanks for the warning." Dinner was simple but warm, served at a small, slightly lopsided table covered in crayon marks and mismatched placemats. Jason poured her a glass of lemonade and passed the breadbasket with mock seriousness. Conversation drifted easily between them, Nora chiming in now and then with facts about volcanoes and a detailed recounting of her newest favorite book. After Nora ran off to finish her science poster, Jason stood to clear the plates. "Hey," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Mind giving me a hand with something before dessert?" Rachel followed him down a narrow hallway into the bathroom, where he pointed to the sink. "Faucet's been leaking. Figured since you handled story time like a champ, you might be ready for advanced plumbing." She stared at the wrench he offered. "I should warn you I'm better with quarterly reports than pipe fittings." Jason leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "That's okay. I just needed a flashlight holder and someone to laugh at my bad jokes." She crouched beside him, fumbling with the wrench as he guided her hands. Water dripped in slow, rhythmic defiance while she tried to follow his instructions. She was clumsy, awkward, totally out of her element, and, oddly, she didn't care. Because here, in this tiny bathroom, with outdated tile and leaky plumbing, she wasn't a CEO. She was just Rachel, learning, laughing, trying. And for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything to anyone. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the familiar silence of Blake, Hart's executive floor. Evelyn stepped out, heels clicking across the marble, a fresh coffee in one hand and her phone already buzzing in the other. She didn't break stride as she answered. "Yes, Adam?" Her assistant's voice came through, calm but clipped. "We need to talk. Privately." That was never a good sign. Moments later, they stood in her corner office, the city skyline stretching out behind her like a painting she hadn't looked at in weeks. Adam shut the door behind them and held out a sleek, black tablet. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, but took it without a word. The screen lit up with a media monitoring dashboard, a blog post, then a local photo. Grainy but unmistakable. A woman bending down to hand a cup of cocoa to a little girl outside a small-town library. Beside her, a man in a worn jacket, smiling in profile. The headline was simple: "Is this Blake, Hart's Ice Queen?" Evelyn's stomach sank. She handed the tablet back without flinching, but her voice was quieter than usual. "Where did they get that?" "Public Facebook post. Someone tagged the library. It got picked up by a few gossip aggregators. Nothing mainstream yet, but—" Adam paused, his expression tightening. "People are starting to ask questions. Where you've been, who he is." Evelyn leaned against her desk, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Let me guess. The board's already talking. Not officially." But Russell saw it. "Of course he did." Adam hesitated, then added, "I'm not judging. You deserve to have a life. But this isn't anonymous anymore. If you keep spending time in Harper Ridge, people will notice. And if it looks like you're distracted—" "I'm not," she said sharply. He held her gaze. "Maybe not. But in this world, perception is reality. And right now, the perception is that you've gone soft." Evelyn swallowed hard. The warmth of last night's spaghetti dinners, Nora's volcano project, laughter over a leaking sink flickered against the cold reality of this office. Two lives pulling in opposite directions. She nodded once. "Thank you, Adam. I'll handle it." But long after he left, she stood at the window, watching the city blur beneath her, wondering which version of herself people were really starting to see, and whether she could be both. Snow had started to fall in soft, silent flurries, blanketing Harper Ridge in a hush that made even the sidewalks seem gentler. Street lamps cast a warm glow on the quiet, white-covered town, and Evelyn Coate, buttoned up, gloved hands stuffed in her pockets, walked beside Jason like they'd done this 100 times before. They'd left the library late after helping clean up a winter-themed reading event. Nora had insisted on hanging every paper snowflake herself, and Jason had let her, even though it meant staying an extra hour. Evelyn hadn't minded. It gave her a reason to stay. Now, they strolled past the old bakery, their footsteps muffled by snow. The air was sharp and still, the kind of cold that nipped at your nose but made everything feel clearer. The street was empty except for them. "I always forget how quiet it gets here in winter," Jason said, his breath forming clouds in front of him, like the whole town just takes a deep breath. Evelyn smiled faintly, nodding. "It's peaceful." Jason looked over at her. "You don't get that in the city?" She hesitated. "Not really. There's always movement, always noise." "And you?" he asked. "Are you always moving too?" The question hung there longer than it should have. Evelyn stopped walking, her boots crunching lightly in the snow. For a moment she thought, "This is it. This is where I tell him." She opened her mouth. "Jason." He turned to her, brows slightly raised, waiting. Her heart beat louder than it should have. She could see the opening, the trust he offered so freely, the way he looked at her like she mattered without conditions. She could tell him everything. Her real name, the company, the reason she'd come here in the first place. But fear clawed at her, because once she said it, everything would change. So she smiled instead, soft and careful, and let the truth settle back behind her ribs. "I was just going to say, thanks for letting me be part of this." Jason smiled, gentle and unaware. "You don't have to thank me. You're here. That's enough." They walked on, the snow falling thicker now, and Evelyn nodded, pretending it was. But as her fingers brushed against his in the cold, she knew the moment had passed, and she wasn't sure she'd get it back. The flyer was crumpled and covered in glitter glue, shoved haphazardly into Jason's coat pocket by a very enthusiastic Nora the second he picked her up from school. "Big news," she declared, climbing into the back seat and yanking off her hat with a flourish. "I got a speaking part, like a real one. 3 whole lines." Jason grinned, unfolding the paper as he started the car. "Let me guess. Something involving elves or dancing snowmen?" She beamed. "I'm the 3rd snowflake in the snowstorm. Very dramatic entrance." He laughed. "Well, I always knew you were the star of the storm." By the time they got home, Nora was already talking at full speed about her costume. "Yes, it has sparkles. No, you can't say it's too much. Her lines, and most importantly, her guest list." "So obviously you're coming," she said, flopping onto the couch with the kind of exhaustion only a 4th grader could feel. "But I want Rachel to come too." Jason glanced up from the mail. "Rachel?" Nora gave him a look. "Yes, Rachel. She read Where the Wild Things Are and helped with glitter cleanup. She's basically part of the family now." He chuckled. "Well, you could ask her. I was hoping you would." Jason gave her a knowing look. "You're learning delegation a little too early." Later that evening, after dinner and dishes, he sent Rachel a quick message. "Nora's got her first play next week. Wants to know if you'll come." She said it's non-negotiable. The reply came faster than he expected. "I wouldn't miss it. Just tell me where to sit." When he told Nora, she squealed and immediately began practicing her lines at top volume. Jason watched her, amused and proud, and maybe just a little anxious. Because having Rachel there suddenly made it feel like more than just a school play. It felt like letting her into something sacred. Rachel Evelyn read the message again later that night, from the sterile glow of her penthouse kitchen. Her assistant's warnings still echoed faintly in the back of her mind, but she ignored them. This wasn't about optics. It was about a little girl who wanted her to see her sparkle. And for once, Evelyn didn't want to miss it. The auditorium at Harper Ridge Elementary was packed tighter than anyone expected for a third-grade winter play. Folding chairs scraped against the tile floor, parents stood along the back wall, and the smell of peppermint and popcorn hung in the air like a festive fog. Rachel sat in the second row between Jason and a bundled-up grandmother who kept offering her peppermints. Nora peeked from behind the red curtain at least 3 times, each time waving furiously at them until Jason gave a discreet thumbs up and Rachel blew a kiss. When the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the room. The curtains pulled back, revealing a snow-covered cardboard forest and a cast of tiny snowflakes, Nora among them, her sparkly costume glittering under the stage lights. Rachel clapped and laughed with everyone else, heart full and warm in a way she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Sitting beside Jason, surrounded by strangers who treated her like a neighbor and not a headline, she felt, if only briefly, like she belonged. They posed for a photo afterward, taken by a local parent with a too-large camera. Jason's arm rested lightly around Rachel's shoulders, Nora grinning between them, holding a bent paper snowflake like it was a trophy. Rachel didn't notice the man 2 rows back, new to town, holding a different kind of lens. The next morning, Evelyn woke to her phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. 6 missed calls. 3 texts from Adam. "You need to see this. Now." She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and reached for the remote. The news came on mid-segment. The anchor was smiling, amused, while the screen beside her showed the grainy photo from the night before Jason, Nora, and Rachel standing close, laughing. Fortune 500 CEO Evelyn Blake spotted, at rural school play, mystery man identified. Her breath caught. Another image flashed on screen, a cropped version, this time just her and Jason, smiling at each other like they were the only 2 people in the room. The anchor continued. Sources confirm the woman in the photo is indeed Evelyn Blake, head of Blake Hart Enterprises, seen here under the alias Rachel. The company has yet to issue a statement. Evelyn sat frozen, the warmth of the night before collapsing beneath a wave of cold reality. In trying to keep her 2 lives separate, she just collided them publicly, irrevocably. And the fallout had only just begun. Jason stared at the photo on his phone, his thumb frozen above the screen as if swiping it away might undo everything. The headline burned into his vision, no matter how many times he blinked. Fortune 500 CEO's small-town secret? Evelyn Blake's disguise revealed in school play Snap. He read the article once, then again. Then a third time, hoping for some kind of explanation that made it less insane, less personal. Evelyn Blake. Not Rachel. Not the soft-spoken woman who helped with glitter glue and laughed at Nora's jokes. Not the one who read bedtime stories and fixed leaky sinks. CEO. Billionaire. A name he'd seen in business magazines associated with mergers and markets, not hot cocoa and snowflake costumes. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. The kind of betrayal that doesn't explode, seeps in slow, bitter. When the knock came at his door an hour later, he already knew it would be her. He opened it to find Evelyn no disguise, no wool coat, just herself. Or rather, the version she'd spent so long hiding from him. She looked exhausted, her face bare of the usual calm veneer, her eyes pleading. "Jason," she started. He held up a hand. "Don't." "I was going to tell you," she said, stepping forward. "I tried so many times." "And yet," he said coldly, "you didn't." She flinched. "I was scared. You treated me like I was real. Not a title. Not a brand. I didn't want to lose that." Jason shook his head slowly, disbelief washing over his features. "So you lied instead?" "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I just left things out." He let out a hollow laugh. "That's a neat way of saying you built trust on something that wasn't even your name." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Well, you did," he said, his tone quiet but sharp. "And worse, you made my daughter trust you. That stopped her cold." "I let you into our world," Jason continued. And now you've turned it into a headline." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words died in her throat. He looked at her one last time, the hurt etched deeply in his face. "Please, go." She stood there for a moment longer, the silence between them deafening, then turned and walked away, each step crunching against the gravel like a closing door. And Jason, standing in the doorway, felt something break that he wasn't sure could be fixed. The boardroom felt colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tone. The usual small talk that preceded meeting updates about weekend getaways, kids in private school, market gossip was gone. Instead, the air buzzed with quiet calculation. Evelyn walked in precisely on time, posture straight, expression unreadable. She wore black todays, leek, and Severias, if armor might somehow make the whispers stop. Every seat was filled. Russell Hanley, of course, sat to her left, fingers steepled in front of him, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting for a misstep. She took her seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin." But she didn't get far. "We were hoping you could address the situation," Russell said, voice smooth as silk, razor underneath. "Before we move on to projections." She didn't flinch. "What situation exactly?" He slid a printed version of the headline across the table like a weapon. "Evelyn Blake's secret life in small town America CEO or character actress?" A few board members chuckled softly. Others didn't bother hiding their concern. "You've become the story, Evelyn," said Marjorie Chen, head of investor relations. "And not in a flattering way. We've had press inquiries from every major outlet," added someone else. "Questions about your leadership, your judgment, your entanglements." Evelyn kept her hands folded. "So I spent time in a small town under a different name. I didn't commit a crime." "No," Russell said smoothly, "but you lied. To the board, to the public. You embedded yourself in one of our own outreach communities under false pretenses. That's exposure legal, reputational, financial." "I didn't go there as a spy," Evelyn snapped. "I went there as a person, something this board seems to have forgotten we are." A tense silence followed. "Emotion doesn't drive shareholder value," Russell said. "Distraction does damage. So, the question becomes, are you still capable of leading this company? Or have your personal indulgences compromised your role?" Evelyn's gaze swept the room, landing on faces she once thought of as allies, colleagues, even friends. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. The version of her that fit in here the perfect, polished executive was no longer enough. Or maybe, she realized, it never was. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after something has been broken, and no one knows how to talk about it yet. Jason sat at the kitchen table, untouched dinner cooling on the plates. The clink of Nora's spoon against her glass of milk was the only sound between them. She hadn't said much since coming home from school, but Jason could feel the questions sitting just beneath her small, furrowed brow. Finally, she looked up. Her voice was soft, not accusing, just curious in that raw, honest way only kids could be. "Did she lie?" she asked. "Or did she just want to be loved?" Jason's hand paused over his fork. He looked at her. Really looked. Her big eyes, the way she picked at her food, the worry trying to settle quietly in her shoulders. Nora didn't care about titles or headlines. She cared that someone she trusted had become a stranger overnight. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, Bug." She nodded slowly, not pressing, just letting the space fill with his uncertainty. Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I think maybe she didn't mean to lie. Maybe she didn't know how to tell the truth without messing everything up. But isn't that still lying?" "Yeah," he admitted. "I guess it is." Nora stirred her milk with the spoon, watching the swirl. "I liked her. Not because she was famous or rich or anything. Just because she was kind. She laughed at my jokes, and she didn't make me feel like a kid." Jason's heart ached. "She was kind, sweetheart. She just made a mistake." "Everyone makes mistakes," Nora said. "Even you sometimes." He smiled faintly. "Especially me. She got up then, walked around the table, and climbed into his lap like she used to when she was smaller. He held her there, quiet for a long time. "I don't hate her," she said softly. "I don't either," he whispered. But forgiveness, Jason knew, didn't always come quickly. Sometimes it started like this, with a child's question and a father's uncertain answer, sitting together in the stillness, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly shifted under their feet. The days that followed moved slowly, as if the whole town of Harper Ridge had taken a step back to let the quiet in. Snow came heavier now, layering the streets in white, muting the usual buzz of small-town life. And Evelyn was gone. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Jason noticed it in the smallest things. An extra cup of cocoa still stacked in the cabinet. The library's reading corner missing that faint scent of her perfume. A stack of new books Nora had saved to show her, now gathering dust on the coffee table. She hadn't returned his messages, not that he'd sent many. Just one. Short. Careful. If you need space, take it. But Nora keeps asking. And I keep wondering. No reply ever came. So Jason filled the space the only way he knew how. He worked. He took every substitute teaching shift he could get. Stayed late, grading papers that didn't need to be graded, fixed a broken heater at the library just because it gave him something to do with his hands. Every hour he spent busy was another hour he didn't have to think about her, about what she'd been hiding, and what he might have lost by pushing her away. But distraction only did so much, because she was still therein. The laughter that used to come so easily from the back of the library, in the shape of Nora's questions that he didn't know how to answer anymore, and in his own heart, which had been quieter since she left, like it was trying not to notice the echo. Nora noticed too, though she didn't say much. She just stayed close to him, like she was afraid he might disappear next. One night, as Jason folded laundry in the living room, he found a paper snowflake tucked inside a book on the couch. Nora must have saved it from the play. Her careful handwriting was scrawled across the center in purple marker. "To Rachel, you're my favorite wild thing." Jason sat down hard, the paper trembling in his hand. He didn't know where Evelyn had gone, but the space she left behind was vast, and getting bigger every day. The penthouse was silent, save for the faint hum of the city far below. The lights outside stretched endlessly, towers, traffic, windows lit like constellations. But inside, Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, a notebook balanced on her knees. She could have typed it. Email would have been cleaner, faster, easier to delete. But this needed to be written the old way, with ink, with pauses, with all the weight she hadn't been able to say out loud. The page in front of her was already filled, though she'd started over 3 times. "Jason, I don't know if I'm writing this for you or for myself. Maybe both." She stared at the sentence for a long time, then kept going. "I told myself I came to Harper Ridge to get away, to breathe, to be invisible for a while. But I think I was really looking for a place where I didn't have to be her, Evelyn Blake, CEO, press release, problem solver. I wanted to see what it felt like to be someone without power or polish. Someone who could sit in a library and read to children and laugh about glitter glue. And then I met you, and Nora, and I forgot why I was pretending in the first place. You made me feel seen, really, seen in a way I haven't in years. I wanted to tell you, I tried. But every time, I froze, terrified that the truth would ruin everything, that you'd look at me and only see the person the headlines painted, not the one standing in front of you." She paused, fingers tightening around the pen. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke something that mattered. But what you gave me, the dinners, the stories, the kindness, was real. And I'll carry it with me, no matter what happens. I miss you. I miss her. I'm sorry. Rachel, Evelyn." She read it once, then again. Her eyes stung. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and set it in the drawer of her nightstand out of sight. Some truths were too heavy to send, too fragile to trust to the world. But still, She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It started with a loose drawer. Nora was looking for tape in her dad's desker. School project was falling apart, and the deadline was tomorrow. She tugged open the middle drawer too hard, and a stack of papers spilled across the floor, half of them old receipts and notes scribbled on the backs of envelopes. But one thing stood out: a pale, ivory envelope with no stamp, no address, just her dad's name written in small, careful handwriting. Jason. She recognized the writing immediately. Rachel's except it wasn't Rachel anymore. It was Evelyn. Her breath caught in her throat. Nora hesitated, the envelope cool and smooth in her hands. She knew it wasn't hers to open, but it wasn't sealed. And something about the way it was hidden, half buried in a drawer like it didn't want to be found, made her feel like maybe it did want to be found after all. She unfolded the letter slowly, reading each line like a secret being whispered to her alone. By the end, her chest ached. She didn't understand everything words like CEO and reputation and shareholders didn't mean much to a 10-year-old. But what she did understand was this: Rachel hadn't meant to hurt them. She'd been scared and sorry, and she still cared. Nora sat there for a long time, fingers curled around the letter, thinking. Then she stood, walked quietly to the kitchen, and pulled a fresh envelope from the drawer. She carefully copied Jason's name onto the front, just like Rachel had. Then, without telling her dad, she slid the letter inside, sealed it, added a stamp, and wrote a return address she remembered from the label on one of Rachel's books. She walked to the corner mailbox after school the next day, coat zipped up to her chin, letter clutched tight in her mittened hand. She knew it wasn't exactly allowed sending someone else's letter, but sometimes grown-ups needed a little push. As she dropped it into the mailbox and listened to the soft thunk of it landing, Nora whispered, "Please work," because she didn't want a world where kindness got forgotten, or where love disappeared just because it got a little messy. And maybe, just maybe, the letter would bring them back. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Jason had just gotten home from school, tired and dusted with chalk from an afternoon of tutoring and substitute teaching. Nora was in the living room, gluing stars to a science poster while humming under her breath. The mail was a mix of bills, catalogs, and one envelope with no return address, just his name in delicate handwriting that stopped him cold. He knew that handwriting. He carried the rest of the mail to the kitchen counter, but the envelope stayed in his hand. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, slowly, he slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the single folded page. "Jason, I don't know if I'm writing this for you or for myself. Maybe both." As he read, the world around him seemed to hush. The clatter of Nora's scissors faded. The ticking kitchen clock slowed. Every sentence unfolded like a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The truth about her name, her fear, her reasons. She hadn't tried to deceive him for sport or pride. She'd just panicked. Let herself believe that honesty would cost her everything good she'd found. She thought he couldn't forgive her. That was the part that got him. Not the secrecy, not the persona, but the fact that this woman who had sat on his floor reading Where the Wild Things Are to a roomful of giggling kids, who had fixed a leaking faucet with the grace of a drunk octopus, who had made cocoa with too many marshmallows, and listened to Nora like every word mattered, believed he was the kind of man who would walk away the moment things got complicated, and maybe he had. He lowered the letter and sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs, hands braced on the table. She had been imperfect, scared, but real. The woman in the letter was the same one who'd shown up day after day in their lives, not polished Evelyn Blake, but Rachel, trying to figure out who she was without the world telling her. "Dad?" Nora peeked into the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Jason looked up at her, eyes still wet, heart cracked wide open. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, kiddo," he said. "Just reading a story that's not over yet." The city felt like another world. Faster, colder, taller. Jason hadn't been in a skyscraper since college. And now he was walking into the kind of building that looked like it didn't even allow bad days to exist inside. Blake. Hart's headquarters towered above the sidewalk like a monument to precision and power. Glass walls, chrome accents, and a security desk that looked more like a military checkpoint than a lobby welcome. Jason hesitated before stepping through the revolving doors, the letter from Evelyn still folded carefully in the inside pocket of his coat. He wasn't here to confront her. He wasn't even sure what he was here to say. Only that he had to see her. "I'm here to see Evelyn Blake," he told the receptionist. "I don't have an appointment." The woman blinked. "Your name?" "Jason Cole." A pause. A tap on the keyboard. Then a soft nod. "She'll be right down." Jason waited in a lobby that smelled like polished marble and designer cologne, surrounded by sleek furniture and muted artwork that looked like it had cost more than his entire house. He stood the whole time, too nervous to sit, too aware of the looks from passers-by in tailored suits. When the elevator doors opened, he saw her. No disguise, no layers to peel away. Just Evelyn, still elegant, still poised but different. More vulnerable somehow, like she hadn't expected this moment either. She walked toward him, heels quiet against the polished floor. "Jason, I got your letter," he said. She nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. "I came because—" "You were right," he continued. "You didn't lie to hurt me. You lied because you didn't think I could handle the truth. And maybe I gave you a reason to believe that." She looked at him, eyes glassy but holding back. "I wanted to tell you, every day, but the more I cared, the harder it got." He took a breath. "I didn't come here to accuse you, Evelyn. I came to listen. If you still want to talk." For a beat, the world around them fell away. Just city lights flickering through glass, and two people who had once found each other in the quietest place on earth. "I do," she whispered, and just like that, something broken began to mend. The rooftop garden was a hidden world, above the city-lush greenery framed by glass barriers, string lights twinkling against the twilight sky. Up here, the noise faded. The traffic, the voices, the buzz of Blake. Hart's corporate heartbeat of it fell away beneath the hum of the wind and the distant murmur of life below. Evelyn stood by the edge, arms folded against the chill, her hair pulled back loosely now, not sculpted into her usual sleek control. She looked smaller up here, not in presence, but in armor. Like the weight of everything had finally settled, and she was too tired to carry it. Jason stepped out from the stairwell behind her, hands in his coat pockets. She didn't turn around right away. "I come here when I can't breathe down there," she said quietly. "Funny, isn't it? I run a company with my name on the building, and I still have to sneak away just to feel like a person." Jason walked to stand beside her, both of them facing the lights of the skyline. "I didn't realize how much pretending I was doing," she continued. "Not just with you, with everyone. For so long, I've been Evelyn Blake, the answer, the headline. And then, in that little town with you and Nora, I got to be Rachel. Just a woman who didn't know what she was doing but who didn't have to." "You didn't need to pretend," he said gently. "You being there reading to kids, helping Nora with her volcano project, fixing a sink with both hands and no clue known of that was fake. That was you." She turned to him, eyes wide and tired. "But you trusted someone who didn't exist." "I trusted someone who showed up," he said. "Someone who listened, who cared, who mattered. And, yeah, I was angry, hurt. But not because of what you were hiding. Because I thought I'd lost something real." Evelyn's voice broke slightly. "I thought if I told you who I really was, everything good would disappear." Jason looked at her, really looked. The only thing that disappeared was you. A long silence stretched between them, full of grief and something new possibility. "I don't want to be two people anymore," she whispered. "I just want to be me, all of me. If that's still something you can handle." Jason stepped closer. "It always was. I just needed you to believe that." And on that rooftop above the city, surrounded by glass and sky, the walls between them finally cracked wide open, and the truth felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. They walked side by side down the quiet sidewalk outside Blake, heart, the rooftop conversation still hanging between them, like mist that hadn't yet burned off. The air was cooler now, the city slowing down as evening deepened, headlights reflecting off puddles and glass. Evelyn's heels clicked less sharply than before, her steps softer, more uncertain. Jason glanced over at her, then stopped near the curb where his car was parked. "I won't pretend this is easy," he said. "Because it's not." "I know," she replied, hands tucked in the pockets of her coat. "You'd have every right to walk away." He shook his head. "I did walk away, and I hated it." She looked at him then, really, looked, and something in her expression flickered, like she hadn't let herself hope for that much. "I've been thinking," Jason continued, voice steady, "about how much I missed. Not the fantasy, not the mystery, but the you that showed up for story time, for Coco, for Nora." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's the real me, too. Or at least, who I'm learning to be when no one's watching." He nodded. "I'm not ready to just fall back into everything like nothing happened, but I don't want to shut the door either." A pause. "What if we start small?" he said. "Dinner. A walk. You come by for one of Nora's practice sesh, keeps trying to choreograph her own snowflake dance, and she insists only you get it." Evelyn let out a soft laugh, surprised by how much it warmed her. "One step at a time," Jason said. "No pretending, no hiding, just seeing what happens." She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." "Good," he said, reaching into his coat and pulling out the crumpled flyer from Nora's winter play, the same one she'd handed him weeks ago, still glitter-speckled and creased at the corners. "She left this in my pocket, said it was her reminder to be brave." He handed it to her gently. "Might be time you borrowed it." Evelyn held it like something sacred, her throat tight. "Then I guess I'll see you soon," she said, eyes bright, with something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah," Jason replied. "Let's try again." And with that, they parted not with finality, but with something far more rare between two people who had every reason to walk away: hope. The conference room was nothing like the one Evelyn had sat in weeks ago, under fluorescent lights and sharpened gazes. This one was smaller, tucked into a side floor of Blake, Hart's headquarters, with sun pouring through open windows and a dry erase board cluttered with marker notes and coffee cup rings. It didn't smell like power, it smelled like paper, ideas, and purpose. Jason stood at the front, sleeves rolled, marker in hand, surrounded by charts, book titles, and community proposals. Evelyn sat across the table, no laptop, no suit jacket, just a legal pad, a pen, and a quiet smile that had grown more frequent lately. They were building something, and for once, it had nothing to do with image. "This one," Jason said, tapping the board, "is simple but powerful after-school book clubs in underfunded schools, run by local volunteers. We provide the materials and support. Low cost, big impact." Evelyn nodded, scribbling something down. "Let's add digital access for rural families. Tablets preloaded with reading apps, maybe a mobile book van for weekends." He grinned. "A book mobile? We're bringing it old school." "Everything old eventually becomes innovative again," she said, arching an eyebrow. Their eyes met, laughter flickering between them, warm, easy, shared. The Blake Heart Literacy Initiative was officially launching in 2 weeks. What had started as a quiet idea, sparked by a library reading circle in a town most executives wouldn't bother to map, had turned into something real, scalable, human. And Evelyn had made one thing clear to the board. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a cornerstone. Jason had been stunned when she asked him to lead it. "I'm not corporate," he'd said at the time, hesitant. "I don't wear suits. I fix faucets and read bedtime stories." "That's exactly why I want you," she'd replied. "You don't just understand community, you live it." Now, as they finalized details budgets, staffing, pilot towns, Jason leaned back, arms crossed, watching her scribble in the margins of her notes with genuine focus. "You know," he said, "this is probably the only boardroom I've ever actually enjoyed. Evelyn looked up, her smile soft and certain. "That's because we're not building a brand here. We're building a bridge." And this time, they were on it together. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, tucked between a yellow-painted bungalow with wind chimes on the porch and a brick ranch where someone always had a kettle on the stove. It was small, modest by any standard, but Evelyn stood on the front step with the keys in her hand like she'd just claimed something monumental. No staff, no gate, no tinted windows, just a little house with a creaky porch swing, peeling shutters, and a front yard that would need mowing come spring. It was perfect. Jason pulled up in his truck, just as she was wrestling with the lock. "Need help?" he called, stepping out with a cardboard box marked Books Plus Tea. She turned, grinning. "Don't judge the jammed lock. I'm still learning the charm of old hinges and sticking doors." "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, handing her the box. "This one's from me and Nora." She insisted on including a library card application, in case you haven't officially settled. Evelyn laughed as she peeked inside. Sure enough, beneath a box of Earl Grey and a gently used copy of Charlotte's Web was the folded library card form Nora's handwriting scrawled at the bottom. "Everyone needs one." She ran her fingers over the paper like it was an invitation to something sacred. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. The floors were wood, the kitchen small but bright, and the living room had a fireplace that probably hadn't worked in years. But to Evelyn, it was a beginning. A place not tied to headlines or quarterly earnings. A space that didn't ask her to perform. Jason helped her set the box on the kitchen counter. "You really doing this?" he asked gently. "No driver? No security detail? No full-time assistant in the guest room?" "I am," she said. "I've lived in penthouses with a view of the whole city, and I've never felt as grounded as I did watching Nora hang paper snowflakes in a school auditorium." He smiled. "You'll get used to it. The quiet, the neighbors asking about your lawn." "I'm counting on it," she said softly. And when she hung her coat on the single hook by the door and tucked the library card form into the drawer beneath the sink, Evelyn Blake, CEO, public figure, powerhouse, felt something she hadn't in a long time. At home. The park was alive with laughter, the kind that rang clear and warm even over the rustling trees and the buzz of cicadas. Balloons swayed from the wooden picnic shelter, strung between beams with curling ribbon and hope. A long folding table groaned under the weight of cupcakes, juice boxes, and the kind of snacks kids tore into like treasure. Nora stood in the center of it all, wearing a glittery birthday crown slightly askew and a grin so wide it made Jason's heart ache in the best way. "Double digits," he said, handing her a paper plate stacked with cheese puffs. "You're basically ancient now." "I'm 10, not 100, she shot back with a dramatic eye roll, but she was giggling. Evelyn stood nearby, helping pass out slices of cake with a pink plastic spatula and frosting smudged on her knuckles. She wore jeans and a soft flannel shirt, her hair pulled into a loose braid that had already begun to fray in the breeze. No one recognized her here as Evelyn Blake. They knew her as Rachel, the woman who read at Story Hour, who helped organize the literacy drive, who brought homemade lemonade and stayed after to stack chairs. And she wouldn't have had it any other way. Neighbors drifted in, and out teachers, parents, kids from the library circle. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought folding chairs. No one talked about job titles. No one asked for press statements. They just showed up, arms full of potluck dishes and stories. Evelyn watched Nora unwrap a handmade card from a classmate and laugh so hard she nearly toppled over. Then Jason caught her eye, and for a long second they simply stood in the middle of it all watching, remembering, being. Later, after the sun had begun to set and the crowd had thinned, Jason brought over 2 pieces of melting birthday cake and handed her one. 10 years, he said quietly, nodding toward Nora, who was still chasing bubbles in the grass. Feels like yesterday and forever. She's incredible, Evelyn murmured. She thinks the same about you. The silence between them was full not of absence, but of something settled, something homegrown. The kind of peace you don't buy, but earn. Found family wasn't about bloodlines or perfect beginnings. It was about showing up. Again and again. And Evelyn had finally arrived. The library was buzzing, packed from wall to wall with children cross-legged on the rug and parents perched along the back wall with coffee cups and quiet smiles. The story corner had never been this full, not even during the summer reading kickoff. But today was special. Today, Rachel was reading. The kids still called her that, though more and more of the adults in town now knew the truth. Not because of headlines, not because of rumors, but because Evelyn Blake had told them herself, in her own time, in her own words, and no one had left. No one had treated her differently. They just kept showing up, so she did too. Evelyn stood in front of the familiar wooden chair, the one with the cushion worn from years of readers and storytime volunteers. Her flannel sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and her hair was down for once, tucked loosely behind her ears. She held a well-loved copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, the corners softened, the pages slightly frayed, the kind of book that had been read 100 times and still held something new in it every time. Jason stood off to the side, leaning against the wall, Nora tucked beside him with her arms wrapped around her favorite stuffed animal. Evelyn met his eyes for just a moment, and he gave her a small, steady nod. She opened the book, and the room quieted. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. Her voice carried gently over the group, warm and even. Not theatrical, not perfect, just hers. The kind of voice that didn't try too hard, that didn't need to be anything but present. As she read, the children leaned in closer, and the adults softened, some smiling to themselves, others brushing away the faintest tears. There was something about the story about being loved until you became real that landed differently when it came from her, because Evelyn had lived it. She finished the final page and looked out at the room. Not one child stirred right away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Then, Nora was the first to clap. The rest followed in a wave of applause and giggles. Evelyn closed the book gently and smiled. This time, it wasn't a mask. It wasn't a strategy. It was a woman who, after everything, had finally found her voice and the place it belonged. The sky was a quiet canvas of stars, scattered like freckles across the dark. The sidewalks of Harper Ridge glistened faintly from a recent dusting of snow, and the cold air carried the distant smell of wood smoke and winter. Evelyn walked between Jason and Nora, their steps slow, unhurried, the kind you take when you don't want a good day to end. Nora had Evelyn's hand in one of hers and a crumpled copy of The Velveteen Rabbit tucked under her arm like treasure. Her birthday crown, worn proudly for a second day, was tilted and bent, but still perched on her head like it belonged there. "I think that was your best story time yet," she said, skipping a little as they turned onto their street. "Even better than the one with the monster voices." Evelyn smiled. "High praise." The monster voices were tough to beat. Jason glanced at her, that quiet warmth in his eyes that had slowly returned in the weeks since they'd decided to start again. Not fast, not blindly, but honestly. It meant something. You being up there. "It meant something to me too," she said. They passed the library, its windows glowing faintly. Then the diner, now closed, the neon sign dark for the night. This town, this small, imperfect, welcoming town, had become part of her. Not as an escape, not as a disguise, but as home. No reporters lingered at the corners now. No flashes, no whispers. Just the crunch of their boots in the snow, and the rhythm of 3 lives quietly weaving together again. As they reached Evelyn's little house, Nora tugged both adults toward the porch. "Hot cocoa?" she asked. "With way too many marshmallows?" Jason looked at Evelyn. "Your call." Evelyn grinned. "I think that's exactly what this night needs." They went inside, the door closing softly behind them. No speeches, no declarations, just laughter in the kitchen and steam rising from mugs and a story still unfolding one page at a time. Where the story went next didn't need to be planned. They were finally living it.